You know what's fascinating about men today? They're walking away from everything they once desperately wanted. Not because they're broken or bitter, but because they finally calculated the true cost of what everyone told them they needed. They're choosing silence over chaos, solitude over sacrifice, peace over performance. And the women they encountered along the way who once dismissed them are now asking the same question that echoes through every dating app, every social circle, every family gathering. Where did all the good men go? But here's the part nobody talks about. They didn't disappear. They evolved. They stopped confusing being wanted with being valued. They learned the difference between a woman who loves them and a woman who loves what they provide. And once a man sees that difference, he can never unsee it. You think this is about fear or weakness or some modern male crisis. But what if I told you it's actually about something much more profound? What if the men everyone's worried about have simply learned to recognize the difference between genuine affection and transactional or strategic positioning? I've spent years listening to men describe the same realization. The moment they understood that she didn't want them. She wanted their future. Not the person they were, but the security they could become. Not their heart, but their wallet. Not their dreams, but their willingness to fund hers. It's a recognition that changes everything about how a man sees relationships, dating, and what he's willing to accept. And this is where everything changes. Let me paint you a picture. You're sitting across from her at dinner, third date, maybe fourth. The conversation flows easily. She's intelligent, attractive, seems genuinely interested in your life. She asks about your job, your ambitions, your 5-year plan. You mistake this for curiosity about who you are, but pay attention to what she's really asking. She's not wondering about your passions or your struggles or what keeps you awake at night thinking. She's focused on your earning potential. She's assessing your trajectory. She's determining whether you're a worthwhile investment for the kind of future she envisions. You tell yourself she's different. She's not like the others who ghosted when they discovered you were between jobs or living with roommates or driving a 10-year-old car. This one seems to see past the superficial. But then you notice something subtle. The way her interest peaks when you mention your promotion. How her eyes light up when you describe your new apartment. The questions about your retirement plan, your savings, your family's financial situation. You're not being interviewed for a boyfriend position. You're being auditioned for the role of provider within this dynamic. But the truth was still waiting for you. The truth that every man eventually discovers if he pays attention long enough. She's not falling in love with you. She's falling in love with the life you can give her. The security you represent. The problems you can solve. The future you can fund. You become not a person but a solution. Not a partner but a provider. Not someone to build with, but someone to be relied upon primarily for resources. This realization doesn't hit you like a lightning bolt. It creeps in slowly, like water through a crack in the foundation. You start noticing patterns. How her affection correlates with your financial gestures. How her availability depends on your ability to plan expensive dates. How her enthusiasm matches your willingness to discuss future investments, home purchases, vacation plans that require your credit card. You're not building a relationship. You're building a business arrangement that feels relational on the surface where your resources fund her lifestyle. Many men feel this shift happening but struggle to name it. They sense something transactional in her love but can't quite identify what's being traded. It's your time for her attention, your money for her presence, your commitment for her conditional affection, your future for her security. You're not entering a partnership. You're signing a contract that slowly reveals itself, where you provide and she receives, where you sacrifice and she benefits, where you work and she enjoys the fruits of your labor. The most devastating part isn't the recognition itself. It's realizing how long you participated in the charade, how many dinners you paid for while she evaluated your earning potential, how many gifts you bought while she calculated your generosity, how many plans you made while she assessed your ability to deliver on promises. You thought you were courting her heart. You were actually applying for a job, the position, her financial security, the salary, everything you have and everything you'll ever earn. And this is the moment everything turns, when you finally understand that her love has a price tag within this framework. Her affection has terms and conditions. Her commitment comes with expectations that have nothing to do with who you are, and everything to do with what you can provide. You're not her chosen partner, you're her selected provider. She didn't fall for your character. She fell for your capacity to fund her dreams. Some men make peace with this arrangement. They accept the role of primary provider with romantic benefits. They tell themselves that providing for someone is love, that being needed is the same as being wanted. They convince themselves that her dependency equals devotion. But deep down, they know the truth. If your value dried up tomorrow, if your income disappeared, if your ability to provide vanished, would she still be there? The answer terrifies them because they already know what it is. But what happens next surprises every man who reaches this point of clarity. Instead of anger or bitterness, something else emerges, a profound sense of relief. Like walking out of a job you hated but stayed at for the security. Like removing a mask you'd worn so long you forgot it wasn't your real face. Like waking up from a dream that was slowly becoming a nightmare. You start to see other men trapped in the same dynamic. The husband working 60-hour weeks to fund his wife's shopping habits. The boyfriend taking second jobs to pay for vacations she insists they need. The fiancé emptying his savings for a wedding that's really about her image, not their commitment. You see the exhaustion in their eyes, the resignation in their posture, the way they've learned to measure their worth by their ability to provide rather than their character, their kindness, their genuine contributions to someone's life. This is when you realize you're not the problem. The broader system and expectations are the problem. A dating culture that's often trained women to view men as utility rather than humanity. A relationship paradigm that's reduced love to a transaction, where affection becomes the reward for financial performance. A social structure that's convinced men their value lies in what they can provide rather than who they are. You think about the generations before you. Your grandfather who came home to a wife who genuinely appreciated his efforts, who contributed her own labour, who saw marriage as partnership rather than sponsorship. Your father who married someone who brought something to the table besides expectations and demands. Men who worked hard but came home to women who worked equally hard in different ways, who valued effort over income, who chose their husbands for character rather than credit scores. But the truth was still waiting for you. The modern dating landscape has changed the rules without announcing the change. Women increasingly have been taught to optimize for security rather than compatibility, to prioritize potential over personality, to choose providers over partners. They're not necessarily malicious about it. They're responding to cultural messages that tell them love doesn't pay the bills, that romance doesn't fund retirement, that character doesn't cover mortgage payments. You find yourself in coffee shops watching young couples navigate these new dynamics. She's scrolling through her phone while he talks about his promotion. He's explaining his investment strategy, while she calculates whether he meets her minimum income requirements in her mind. You see the performance on both sides. He's auditioning for the role of provider. She's evaluating whether he's worth the investment of her time and attention. The saddest part is watching men contort themselves trying to meet these expectations. Guys working themselves to exhaustion to afford the lifestyle she expects. Men sacrificing their passions, their health, their peace of mind to maintain the financial performance that keeps her interested. Boys learning that their value as potential partners correlates directly with their earning potential, rather than their character, their integrity, their capacity for genuine connection. And this is where the profound shift happens. When men realize they have a choice, they can continue playing a game where they're valued for their resources rather than their humanity. Or they can walk away from the table entirely. They can refuse to audition for a role that requires them to sacrifice themselves for someone else's security. They can choose peace over performance, solitude over servitude, themselves over the endless pursuit of someone else's approval. This isn't about becoming bitter toward women or abandoning the possibility of love. It's about recognizing the difference between genuine partnership and strategic positioning. It's about understanding that real love doesn't come with a financial prerequisite. That authentic connection doesn't require you to prove your worth through your wallet. That the right person will value your presence more than your presence, your character more than your credit score, your heart more than your bank account. What comes next might explain a lot of what you've been carrying. Because once you see this dynamic clearly, once you understand how modern dating has in many cases become a marketplace where men are valued as commodities rather than human beings, everything changes. Your standards change, your expectations change, your willingness to accept certain terms and conditions changes, and most importantly, your respect for yourself finally begins to override your desperate need for someone else's approval. The men who have made this realization aren't missing out on love, they're avoiding counterfeit versions of it. They're refusing to pay premium prices for discount affection. They're choosing to value themselves enough to wait for someone who values them, for reasons that have nothing to do with their ability to fund her dreams. And in that choice, they're finding something they never expected: peace. She starts asking different questions now, not about your hobbies or your childhood or what makes you laugh. She wants to know about your career trajectory, your investment portfolio, whether you're thinking about buying property. She frames it as planning for the future, but you're starting to recognize the audit taking place beneath the surface. Every answer gets filed away in some mental spreadsheet, where your worth gets calculated against her expectations. But what happens next surprises every man who's been through this evaluation. You begin to notice how quickly she loses interest when the conversation drifts away from your financial prospects. How her eyes glaze over when you talk about your struggles, your fears, your genuine dreams that don't come with dollar signs attached. She's not interested in your humanity. She's interested in your perceived utility. You're not a person to be known. You're a resource to be assessed. The realization hits differently for different men. For some, it's watching her face change when they mention taking time off work to care for a sick parent. For others, it's the way she pivots the conversation every time they express uncertainty about their career path. Some men figure it out when they lose their job and suddenly her calls become less frequent, her availability more limited, her affection more conditional, and this is where everything changes. You start seeing this pattern everywhere. In the coffee shop, you overhear her telling her friend that he's nice but doesn't make enough money. At dinner parties, you watch women discuss their boyfriends in transactional terms, comparing earning potential and career prospects. You see the way they light up when successful men enter the room and how quickly they dismiss anyone who doesn't meet their financial criteria. You realize you've been living in a world where your emotional availability matters less than your bank account availability, where your capacity to listen, to support, to genuinely care about someone's well-being ranks somewhere below your capacity to fund vacations and pay for expensive dinners. You're not being chosen for who you are. You're being selected for what you can provide, but the truth was still waiting for you. The women who operate this way aren't necessarily malicious. They've been shaped by a culture that tells them love doesn't pay rent, romance doesn't fund retirement, and feelings don't provide financial security. They've learned to optimize for stability over compatibility, potential over passion, security over authentic connection. They're playing a game they didn't necessarily choose to play, but they're playing it with learned efficiency. You watch men around you adapt to this reality in different ways. Some embrace the provider role completely, working themselves into early graves trying to meet ever-increasing financial expectations. Others become bitter, raging against a system that reduced them to human ATMs. But a growing number are making a different choice entirely. They're walking away from the game altogether, and this is the moment everything turns. These men aren't giving up on love, they're giving up on performing for it, they're refusing to audition for affection, they're choosing to value themselves enough to wait for someone who values them for reasons that have nothing to do with their earning potential. They're discovering that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who only wants you for what you can provide. You start noticing these men everywhere once you know what to look for. They're the ones who stop trying to impress women with expensive restaurants and lavish gifts. They're the guys who deleted dating apps rather than continue swiping through profiles that read like job requirements. They're the men who chose peace over the exhausting performance of modern courtship. But here's the part nobody talks about. These men aren't bitter or angry or resentful toward women. They're simply protecting something they worked too hard to build. Their peace, their sense of self, their financial independence, their right to exist without having to constantly prove their worth through their wallet. They've learned to distinguish between genuine affection and strategic positioning, between authentic connection and calculated investment. You begin to understand that the question isn't whether you can find someone who wants you. The question is whether you can find someone who wants you for the right reasons. Someone who's attracted to your character rather than your credit score. Someone who values your presence more than your presence. Someone who chooses you when you're struggling just as readily as when you're succeeding. The men who've made this realization describe a profound shift in their relationship with solitude, where once they feared being alone, now they fear losing the peace they've found in their own company. Where once they desperately sought validation through romantic relationships, now they find validation through their own self-respect and personal achievements. But what happens next might explain a lot of what you've been carrying. You already know this truth. I'm just saying it out loud for you. She doesn't want your future. She wants the security your future represents. And once a man sees that difference, he can never unsee it. The men who walked away didn't abandon love. They abandoned the performance. They stopped auditioning for affection and started respecting themselves enough to wait for someone who values them without conditions, without calculations, without that mental spreadsheet where their worth gets measured against her expectations. You feared the silence once. Now it's the only voice that tells you the truth. Peace wasn't the absence of her. It was the return of you. The return of a man who knows his worth isn't determined by his wallet, who understands that real love doesn't come with a price tag, who refuses to reduce himself to a financial solution for someone else's problems. There are more men walking this path than you think. Share this with one of them. If you want to hear the voice you've been ignoring inside yourself, you know where to find me.